Today's video, we're gonna check out Tommy's car. We have it to design some skid plates to protect the front steering rack and protect the rear subframe. We want to make those the bottom out points rather than suspension and other things. We get a chance to actually look at this car after Mike Reich built it. They did this car in such a fast, timely manner. I'm shocked at the quality of this car. Now, they did buy pretty much every single thing from the C6 catalog that I made, even the crash structure, front and rear. Basically, we have an aluminum chassis with the same track width and wheelbase as a C6. That's really what makes this C7 different from the C6, and then obviously the body kit. But let's take a close-up look at this 1,000 horsepower, 950 foot-pounds of torque, LS-based engine with a front transmission, 4-speed, quick change rear, and all the other goodies that it takes to make a pro-level drift car work as good as this one does. Right off the bat, when you take a look at how aggressive everything is, the first thing I noticed, just because we do so much 3D printing and stuff, is the 3D printed headlights. These things are sick. Obviously the layer lines and stuff could be perfected over time, but you see he's got a strip here for an LED, and then they just bored a circle in here for this projector lens. I'm assuming he can change the colors from whatever is not legal for FD to what is legal for FD, so you're probably gonna see some red, green, blue, whatever you want out of those. Once we look inside, underneath the beautiful carbon fiber hood, you can see our crash structure right away. Tommy did a great job at color matching all of our powder coated stuff with the subframe. Any bracket, any extra piece is our Pro Kit green. We've got a bunch of vibrant performance stuff. Tommy and I share a lot of the same partners, so it's really easy to talk about this stuff. Obviously, the FDF Pro Angle Kit is in the front here, and the Magnuson blower setup that he's running, this is a 427 supercharged engine. Because of our steering rack location, he's able to run the wide belt best accessories that you can get for this drive to avoid as many belt problems as possible. So after Tommy's testing, they ran into 0 belt issues whatsoever. And if you remember or watch Tommy at all, he had a ton of belt issues through the S14. Moving around to the side, one of the coolest things is that he kept the electronic control for the door. So you simply push this button and it opens the door, and then you have the manual handle there on the floor. So there's 2 methods to get inside. You can open the manual release or push this button. We're definitely going to copy that and put that onto our C6s, because every C6 switch has that wired into it already, so it is easy to do. The D&D seats, the purple belts is a nice contrast. He's got this purple, and then the dash actually has a red inlay, which is really nice. And it kind of changes the interior a little bit. It makes it pop a bit more. The C7s were aluminum chassis with a target top, so this roof comes off just like the C6s. The Z06 C6 is not able to remove the targa. It's a full aluminum chassis, so that's a big difference between the two. In the rear is a lot more FDF stuff. Nice little feature, kept the stock hood shocks. That's always great. We've got a very similar rad setup to what I'm running, but he's running PWR fans. These things are super high output. I believe they are brushless. I know they sell different variations, but I believe that's what these are. So they draw a ton of air through the rad. He is going to finish some ducting to the opening here on the hatch. Again, this is our crash structure. This crash structure has seen a ton of walls on my C6 and still looks the same. Your failure point is the bash bar. And you can see here he kept the bash bar nice and far from the corners so that it allows that body to compress a bunch before getting to the metal. And then once you're into the metal is going to bend quite easily. Mounting these points at this location rather than wider gives us this entire corner to deflect. We don't want to put too much resistance to crush the corner because that's going to bring the front end around. We don't want to do that. We would rather destroy the rear than hit the front. The rest of it's nice. He's got Zeus clips everywhere for all the body panels, all these little bendable rods that come up. Easy if you just destroy them to grab one of them and pull them back, or if you do that too many times, obviously you're gonna break one of these off, but you can just fix it with a quick weld. So that is a nice design. One thing that I really love about the C7s over the C6 is their shock mounts. The shock is easily removed with 2 bolts right into the frame here, and then the same method for adjusting camber and stuff right on these studs that we made for them. So you can easily add shims just like they intended from factory to adjust camber. You can also adjust it here at the arm, but all of this is just, it's very modern, it's very race car spec, and it is great for working on. Same feature on the driver's door. You can see the inside here. I don't know why they would have done carbon here, Kevlar there. Maybe he wanted the carbon look on the outside, but this is also just gorgeous. Got nice protective actual carbon layer on the cage door bars. This is a Cage Kits cage for the C7. I know that it was their first variation, so they did have to do a couple tweaks to it, but otherwise it bolts in on all the corners. You can see the bolt-in plates there, bolt-in plates here. That's because this chassis is made of aluminum. It makes everything way more complicated, but this car is running at a very favorable weight. Not gonna tell you what that is, but it's a good weight. For this class, it's exactly perfect what he needs to be. We're gonna lift this car up and look at everything underneath, give it a good once-over, because underneath the car is really what makes it work, at least from the FDF Race Shop perspective. Obviously, they could talk a whole bunch about the drivetrain under the hood, but we're here to show you some suspension stuff. Okay, so underneath we get to see a lot of where the magic happens. MF Customs, nice little badge here. Not sure who they are. I think they're a powder coating company in Quebec, and they obviously did a fantastic job. You can see they covered off all of the points where you have to put suspension mounting, so it's not good to clamp powder coating between spacers, especially when these big bolts need like 130, 140 foot-pounds. But you get to see our C6 Pro kit that we made and adapted to the C7. A couple things needed to change, but not a ton. You can see that the bump stops are being well utilized at full lock. This is perfect. This block is meant to take an absolute beating against the arm, and it gives you a great stopping location at full bump, full droop. It's still going to contact in the same spot. This is just for a trailing wheel bump stop. It's also been making its mark right here on the lower, sorry. But it really doesn't need to do too much on the trailing wheel since all your pressure is riding on the lead. We have our Wilwood brake setup. This is the exact same setup that I run on all of my cars since day one. The rotors are all the same front to back. The calipers are all the same front to back, but we just changed the bore sizes. So all of our adapter brake brackets are literally the same because the Corvette's front and rear wheel bearings are the same. Not the same, there is a spline in the rear, but same dimensions. All we do is change the bores, so we can really move around these calipers. The front caliper is actually the same as the rear handbrake caliper, and then the foot brake is a smaller bore. Swift springs, BC coilovers, nice brake line setup. We have hard lines throughout the chassis, flex lines going to the caliper. Race car stuff, just a zip tie to the upper. Really, this seems like you should have a little bracket, a little mount, but this is actually your fastest way to swap parts out and just retie something up, so it's really not uncommon to see stuff like that. Smooth adjusters on the uppers. One thing we had to do was increase clearance here for the coilover on the C7, where the C6 is much narrower. So that's one thing we had to do. We've got a sway bar. They used partially our sway bar blade kit, but then they made their own brackets here with poly bushings. So that's Mike Reich doing some custom stuff there. We've got some custom plates here. We sold these welded to this, but then he added an aluminum adaptation to the frame rail so that he could connect the front crash structure. You can see how huge this pulley is. It's crazy how they run. And it's crazy that it uses the 3 bolts on the front of the ATI balancer in the back to drive this entire supercharger. So that is a ton of force, leverage, all that good stuff being applied here. Mechanical power steering pump. I always run electric. Tommy's running mechanical, so that's one big difference. Alternator is the exact same. Let's give this angle kit a little cycle here. So throughout its travel range, it's super smooth. At full droop, we're almost touching the arm, but this clearance here only improves as you compress. So at full droop, to be able to get this amount of usable angle isn't very common on cars. He's obviously limited the angle right before the upper control arm interferes with the tire. He is running a pretty big tire up front, which I encouraged him to do. This is a wide car. It utilizes and can fit a nice big tire, and you're gonna just maximize your amount of speed and drift that you're able to achieve when you have a nice, good front tire. We do have the concept, they sound like an 8-to-1. They do a lot of trickery with merging the correct runners together to get it to have that 8-to-1 sound. So we're going from 4 to 2, and then we're going from 2 on each side into 1. So we have here the 4-to-1 that dumps into the 4-inch titanium exhaust. We have it currently removed right now because we're making a skid plate here and we just needed to do some checks on some stuff. We've got our C7 quick change Bulldog diff mount. This is the front plate for the C7, and then the rear plate looks like this. Basically, when you set the diff in, the front plate aligns with the original holes, but the rear plate, you need to add these 4 additional holes. We join the 2 sides together, left to right, gives us a little more stability and accuracy. Basically, the diff I designed to sit on top of the subframe here and here. That kind of locates where the diff is going to be level, and then you just drill these 4 holes. It's actually a really fast install. We do sell these. These are the 1500 horsepower version, so they can handle just about anything. We've got our drive shaft shop axles in place. We actually have been selling this exact length drive shaft for many years for the C6 and the C7. This is our C7 grip kit. Definitely a few differences here on the lower and the upper, and the knuckle orientation is also different. We've got our bump steer or toe gain control. Currently, Tommy's running it in the neutral position, 0 toe gain. He felt that he didn't need to dial in anything further than this. We have those Wilwood calipers that you saw, dual caliper, smaller foot brake, larger hand brake, same thing on both sides. And we even utilize our smooth adjuster connecting the coilover to it. This is a really easy height adjustment and a really fast removal. If you needed to remove this lower control arm, zap this off, heim joint and coilover disconnects, take these off, sway bar disconnect, and the arm is off. So you can do this within under a minute, and then realigning everything like we've shown you before is extremely fast. So that's something that I hope he doesn't need to use, but if he does, it's going to be quick. We've got the BC two-way canisters here and similar sway bar setup. This is our spline kit. Mike made these mounts himself. Mike did a ton of custom stuff on this. He was working on it day and night every time I talked to him. And everything's custom, even from like this drive shaft hoop. They did a really nice job utilizing some factory holes here, making a nice U going up and around the drive shaft. And then they also added a bracket to hold their exhaust. So kind of utilizing that experience in building stuff to make things make sense. A lot of times the first time someone builds a car, you don't see tricks of the trade like that. We're going to be utilizing a couple of these spare threaded holes to hold our skid plate, just so that we can hit the skid plate before we are hitting the subframe or any suspension points. And I believe Tommy did the same setup as me, which is maintaining the 1/2 of the fuel tank. This is essentially your fuel cell. It's in a great location. It's nice and low. It's well protected. External fuel pump, probably running an internal surge tank of some kind. And then on this side, he's located some electronics, his water pump, and a couple other things are in here. That's identical to how we did our C6. One cool thing between the two chassis, we weighed the subframes. This subframe is somewhat of a generative design, basically a far more advanced way of creating products on newer vehicles. And it is, I believe, 6 or 7 pounds lighter. I wrote it down, and the front was also equivalent, 6 to 7 pounds lighter than the C6. Basically, they look the same, but the C6 is blocky and square, and this is flowy and formed. So it really, you can see how much effort they put into making this light but strong with all these organic looking surfaces and shapes, whereas the C6 stuff is all very blocky. So they made the C6 stuff probably overkill, a little bit stronger than it needed to be. I'm sure they ran their tests and stuff. Obviously GM made this as a race car, but they just went another step further on the C7 stuff, and it is just like, you know, 5% lighter in every area of the chassis. Now, there's a big question on the C7 on if it's good or not, meaning the chassis is built out of aluminum, and if you crash aluminum, it's way harder to repair versus crashing a steel chassis. It also takes way more effort to build the car. I'm really looking forward to seeing how Tommy puts this car through a season and how it ends up being, because I definitely was an advocate for, hey, if you want a C7, put a C7 body on it, but build a C6 chassis. And he really wanted to be different. He really wanted to do it the hard way, and that is kind of how, I mean, I do things the hard way all the time. That's how Tommy operates. That's how guys like us work. He wanted to do it, and he did it. And he did it. We're still in February. He still has 2 more months to get this thing perfected, way more testing. He's probably going to be driving at LZ after we get a couple things tuned up. We're going to find out if it, I honestly don't have the answer. On a racing chassis platform, this car is far more impressive than a C6. But in a drifting scenario where physical contact with other cars is imminent per round, during practice, you're going to hit 3 or 4 guys. We're going to find out how this chassis holds up, and I hope that it holds up really well. Really excited to see Tommy rep our products with this car. There's way more than just suspension this time, and everyone that was involved with building this with Tommy, you guys did a great job. I'm really impressed with the time you were able to do it and the quality that has been put into this build. So you guys are going to want to follow it because it sounds, works, and is nasty, and Tommy's one of the best drivers I've ever seen. So he's not going to be your usual normal rookie in Pro 1. He's going to be much different than that. That's it for this video. We'll see you guys in the next one. We're going ice drifting. We're probably going to cover that too. Finalizing some products on the BRZ, and that's what you guys are probably going to see next.